Hello everyone, I'm Seth and I'm here to talk to you about the importance of pollinator species and their habitats. Specifically, we're going to be talking about human-made habitats, and we're going to be bringing up bioswales and pollinator plots, which as a K-State regular, we have lots of these sprinkled around the campus, so it's important to note about these and figure out what their true purpose is instead of just for looks. So bioswales in particular are used for helping maintain stormwater systems and help filter that stormwater while also preventing the transport of soils and sediments. This is primarily due to the incorporation of prairie grasses, which have very extensive root systems and can last through most of the year. Now, pollinator plots are also pieces of land that we use to exclusively encourage pollinator population presence. Both of these habitats are maintained by using native plants rather than the incorporation of other plants that are popular amongst certain pollinator groups. Instead, we kind of like to stick to what is already natively found in an area, and this is to help support the native insects we have in this area. Some environmental benefits is we have pollination being just critical for the reproduction of wild plants. No one goes and self-pollinates or manually pollinates wild plants. That's something that is exclusively done by a lot of our insect friends, whether it's beetles, whether it's butterflies or bees or flies or mosquitoes. Moving on, even some domesticated plants that we use aren't self-pollinating, which it's important to note that the assistance of pollinators helps prevent the amount of human work needed to help pollinate these. In addition, I'd also like to bring up how pollinator species aren't exclusively just insects. Pollinators can also be birds and squirrels and rodents and a variety of things, and this is due to just the active choice of transferring pollen from one plant to another. Especially with our birds, we have some examples like the lesser prairie chicken is known to do it, as well as hummingbirds. And then when you incorporate rodents, you have squirrels, you have field mice and wood rats. And all of these individuals play their part in helping pollinate these wild plants to help keep them around longer or support the growth in new areas that otherwise would be turned into woody encroachments. Now, I will admit that pollinator species and as a niche is often endangered, and this is due to, one, the removal of habitat, as well as the removal of certain plant species that are important to selected insect species. Like on our right here, we have a monarch butterfly who heavily relies on milkweed to support the growth as well as the breeding and creation of caterpillars. Pollinators also assist in agricultural settings by helping increase plant reproduction and support surrounding ecosystems, which will help maintain more of our native pollinators to be around agricultural areas. I'd also like to add that some studies show that supporting pollinators in urban settings can increase resiliency in both air and water quality rates, and also support the system by maintaining a bit more of a human connection to it by adding some wilderness to a very urban area such as downtown Manhattan or Kansas City or Topeka. On to slide 4, we have more of the human benefits on pollinators. I want to get in a little bit more of the nitty-gritty here. So we're going to talk about how agricultural production is increased, and this is by pollinators helping support yield success, whether this is regarding wheat or soybeans, as well as just other things like Kansas is heavily known for sunflowers, which is also a very sought after plant for many of our pollinators. The maximization of food production is another very important benefit that we have to having pollinators around. This helps feed not only us, but also our livestock, which can be used for agricultural management and or feeding the population. Maintaining plant population is also a very important note to have, and this is primarily due to mental health reasons as well as overall aesthetic of urban areas. Some rural areas are also supported by this, and this is due to having more pollinator presence around agricultural areas and fields. The quality of life of a lot of these human benefits can also be tied to the use of traditional and modern plants for medicinal purposes, as well as the benefit to mental health that a lot of humans feel when they're doing nature walks and or gardening and just enjoying a pass by of something that's a little bit more colorful than traditional green turf grasses and or trees. So moving on into a little bit of the data that we've collected over our study. We collected data in 4 plots across the campus. We did the quad, we did the architectural building, Memorial Stadium, and the Beach Art Museum. So just to elaborate a little bit farther on these plots, we used the quad as more of our control since there's not a lot of flowering plants going on there. It's just a lot of grass. We also had a few trees around, which was nice to have, especially when it got a little bit warmer here in early August or early September. The important connection here that you can see across a lot of this data, especially down here at the bottom, let me turn on my laser pointer, is that we had a large amount of insect species counted across a larger area where more plant species were counted. When you look up here at this second graph, you can see that across these 4 sites, especially here in the Art Museum as well as Memorial, we had a lot more insects counted, and this is primarily due to the amount of plant species that we found, as well as just the volume and density. In the Art Museum, we counted a lot more insects, and this is primarily due to 2 variables, and this is one being a more of a chemical-free environment, as well as being a wide variety of plants. We had shrubs, we had forbs, we had a lot of flowers and tall grasses as well. And we only counted half of that art plot because incorporating the other one, this would have been a much higher value. Now, incorporating Memorial lot, we had much more tall grasses, much more grasses, and a lot of forbs rather than having more flowering plants. And this, you can see that there was a little bit of variation here. We had a lot less bees and butterflies and flyovers than we did, just in the overall count of insect species. And the comparison between both of these plots were much more of our higher quality sites compared to the quad, where we only really saw about 2 insects per plot, and maybe in total across all of our sampling we only saw maybe 3 or 4 insects, flying insects counted. The direct correlation here that we see on these red lines is very directly related to the amount of species richness in plants that we saw, and I would urge y'all to take a moment to look at these and digest a little bit on the counts and the numbers, because the data on our end showed that we had a lot of insect population increase as the plot, as we went about collecting each sample and plot and area, and we saw more bees and more butterflies in areas where we had larger variation and plant composition. We didn't just have tall grasses, we didn't just have forbs, we didn't just have flowers. And this included even the Beach Museum, where we had that large amount of just plant variety. So moving on into more of a social change on this, to help incorporate and implement more pollinator plots in our day-to-day lives as well as our soon-to-be homes and or apartments, you can implement correct growing and planting techniques to help support the variety, to incorporate also more visitation by pollinators. So some that I want to start off with is planting in groups, having sections of, hey, this is going to be flowers, this is going to be shrubs, this is going to be tall grasses, having that grouping will allow more space and more variety for a variety of different pollinators to visit, because when you do incorporate something such as our monarch butterflies who are migratory, having that extra little bit of area so that you can plant a little bit of milkweed, or having more milkweed just in general can support the chrysalising of butterflies. Some other good planting techniques is planting in fall and late winter. This helps support the germination of when we get our large amounts of rainfall during the springtime. You also can incorporate the blooming seasons, because not everything blooms in spring, not everything blooms at the start. Sometimes stuff blooms a little bit later, and that's at the end of spring. Sometimes that's in summer. And incorporating tall grasses and flowering plants as well as shrubbery can help support that early, middle, and late season blooming. But yeah, and then especially when you think about incorporating these pollinator plots, it's important to think about the space that you have. If you're using a little apartment gardening box, you won't have the room to plant, tall grasses or a lot of forbs. So incorporating that, as well as maybe adding like some extra flower plots to the side so that you can grow a little bit of tall grass or a little bit of milkweed or blue stem. Incorporating this will allow that variety to occur in this area that you're trying to implement more, pollinator presence at. Now moving on to our last slide, you have the species and aesthetics of pollinator plots. This goes into the implementation of process. So having that grouping as well as having that choice of aesthetic is important to note, especially if you don't want just a bunch of random stuff growing in your flower bed or in your pollinator plot. So I incorporated a little bit of species here and the grasses, shrubs, and flowers. I wanted to exclusively incorporate native species to Kansas, so I brought up big blue stem, Indian grass, some stuff like indigo bush and sunflowers and milkweed, stuff that we see kind of often, as well as upright prairie coneflower. That's one of my favorites personally. But if you wanted to stick to something like, hey, I'm going to go for the Kansas aesthetic of having this yellow and this brown, incorporating stuff like milkweed as well as sunflowers and having that like purple poppy mallow, like that will have that aesthetic there for what you're looking for. Especially in this picture down here on below, you see a little bit of that purple poppy mallow as well as some sunflowers. But incorporating variation, like your top right photo and the top left photo, we have not just flowers, but we also have tall grasses and some forbs available. And constructing this is almost to your own discretion. If you did just want to stick to exclusively wildflowers, you totally could. And still having that availability for pollinators would encourage some presence in these areas. So get your gardening gloves on, get a little dirty, and do a little bit of research. Don't be afraid to go on a couple of nature walks and take it in and truly digest of, hey, what is native around here, and this is kind of what I want to have in my pollinator plot or garden. On my last slide here, I have some references. If you have any desire to do a little bit of research on these 4 sites are pretty important for all of us. All of my group used a bit of each of these sites to talk about, whether it was regarding our research portion or if it was going into constructing our actual journal. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day and happy planting.